Hi, let's take a look at the anterior compartment of the forearm. So the anterior compartment of the forearm is comprised of three layers: a superficial layer, a middle layer, and a deep layer. And each of these layers is going to be able to work on joints that progressively run more distally. So just so we can orient, this is the distal portion of a left upper limb. There is the elbow joint, and this would be the lateral side. We can also refer to the lateral side as the radial side. The opposite side, therefore, will be the medial side, and we can refer to this as the ulnar side of the forearm. So beyond the elbow, as we move progressively more distally, we're going to encounter a series of joints. So there is the wrist joint, oftentimes referred to as the radiocarpal joint because it's between the radius and the proximal row of carpals. There's also a joint between the carpals and the metacarpals called the Carpo metacarpal joint. Beyond the Carpo metacarpal joint, so between the bones of the wrist and the bones of the hand, we're also going to have metacarpo-phalangeal joints. So these will be between the metacarpals and the phalanges, or the digits. And then, so for our digits, we have digits 1, 2, 3, 4, and the pinky is 5. So for digits 2 through 5, we're going to have proximal interphalangeal joints, so PIPs. And then we'll also have distal interphalangeal joints, or DIPs, because for these phalanges, there's going to be a proximal, a middle, and a distal phalanx. For the first digit, we only have an interphalangeal joint. So the more superficial the layer of the forearm, the more proximal the joints that are going to be affected by the actions of these muscles. So let me erase quite a bit of this. Actually, this might be not more efficient. My apologies. So let's take a look at what we have. So first and foremost, one of the more important muscles to discuss here is the Pronator teres. And its importance isn't from that of action, but rather from that of location. So the Pronator teres muscle, we could outline it here, at least the portions of the muscle that we can see, has two heads. There's an ulnar head, which originates on the coronoid process of the ulna, and a humeral head that originates just proximal to its medial epicondyle. And these come together to attach to the lateral shaft of the radius. And this is a muscle that is important for pronation of that radioulnar joint. between these two heads, and we can't see it here, but between these two heads is going to run the median nerve, which is going to be the major innervator of the muscles of the anterior compartment. Nearly every muscle will be innervated by the median nerve. The ulnar nerve is also going to come into play. The ulnar nerve is responsible for innervating approximately 1.5 muscles. So flexor carpi ulnaris is the one muscle, and then half muscle, half of the flexor digitorum profundus, which we'll see. So I said that pronator teres was an important muscle from the perspective of location. And I say that because all of the muscles of the anterior forearm that we're looking at are going to be found medial, so in this direction from this muscle. So I'm going to circle those right now. What we're not discussing now is this rather large prominent muscle that we can see anteriorly. This is the Brachioradialis muscle. The Brachioradialis muscle is a muscle of the posterior forearm, even though it's wrapped around the way that it is. It is solidly innervated by the radial nerve, because the radial nerve innervates all of those posterior compartment muscles. So let's take a look at what we can see here. And there are going to be 3 muscles to draw our attention to. Let's kind of pay attention to names here. I'm going to go on the ones that flank first. So we have flexor, carpi, radialis. So
I don't know that.
Sorry, Alexa chimed in there. So flexor, carpi, radialis muscle, and I'll just begin to highlight it here for us. Most of its belly is more proximal, and then it has this very, 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 very robust tendon, which we can see here. So flexor carpi radialis is originating from the common flexor tendon, so the CFT. The common flexor tendon is going to be the origin of many of these anterior forearm compartment muscles, and it's going to attach to the medial epicondyle of the humerus. So the medial elbow there. So flexor carpi radialis begins there, and its tendon descends down, and it's going to eventually attach to the second metacarpal, so the hand bone associated with digit number 2, which is the pointer finger there. We also have, so I'll erase that. We also have flexor carpi ulnaris muscle. So flexor carpi.
Sorry, I'm not sure about that.
Flexor carpi ulnaris muscle in this view is predominantly just this tendon. Most of its belly can be found more posteromedially, but we can see this robust tendon. It is originating up here from the common flexor tendon, and it's descending down to insert on the hamate, which is a carpal bone, as well as the 5th metacarpal. So the hand bone associated with the pinky finger. And this tendon along the way is going to have another carpal develop within it called the pisiform, which is a heterotopic bone that develops in the tendon of flexor carpi ulnaris. So between flexor carpi ulnaris and flexor carpi radialis here, these muscles are going to be very important flexors of the wrist joint or the radiocarpal joint together. Now, independently, flexor carpi radialis is going to have some abduction of the radiocarpal joint, so it's going to cause the hand to wag laterally, whereas flexor carpi ulnaris is going to be an adductor independently of that joint. So if you think about a very sort of demure or polite wave, you would be employing these muscles serially back and forth between one another. So last, and probably certainly least here, we can also see a muscle that originates on that common flexor tendon. And it has a very uniquely identifiable tendon when it is present. This is called the Palmaris longus muscle because it goes from that common flexor tendon down to and sometimes attaches to that flexor retinaculum, but more so, and I'll erase this so we can see it, it's inserting into that palmar aponeurosis. So this is a muscle that that when it's tensed, it's going to tense that palmar aponeurosis, as well as being a very weak flexor of the wrist muscle. Palmaris longus is a muscle which is quite variable, so it's very frequently absent, and bilaterally it may not necessarily be symmetrical. So those are the superficial layer muscles. Let's take a look at the middle layer of muscles here. So here is flexor carpi radialis tendon. Here is palmaris longus tendon. There is flexor carpi ulnaris. And if you can kind of imagine underneath them, so I'm talking about all of this muscle here and through there, that is going to be the middle layer, or flexor digitorum superficialis. So flexor digitorum superficialis also, like all of those superficial layer muscles, originates at the common flexor tendon. And it will go down, and this is actually going deep to the flexor retinaculum, so it's going through the carpal tunnel. And when it goes through the carpal tunnel, its tendons are going to be surrounded by the ulnar bursa, and it's going to insert on these tendons on the middle phalanges of digits 2 through 5. And so when we think of that shortening, so not only is it going to be able to be a flexor of the proximal interphalangeal joint, but it will also be a flexor of the metacarpal phalangeal joint, as well as the carpo-metacarpal joints, as well as the radiocarpal joints. But as you can see, it far surpasses distally the superficial layer muscles' abilities of flexing joints. So as we go yet even deeper here, we're going to come across the Flexor Digitorum Profundus, which is quite a large muscle. Also, this is going to be somewhat unique in that it's predominantly attaching to the anterior portion of the ulna. So we're not originating from the common flexor tendon like so many of the other muscles that we've discussed. It's also originating down through that interosseous membrane that's running between the radius and the ulna. And so I'll kind of outline this muscle for us here. And it's going to split up into several tendons, and those tendons are going to be systematically surrounded by the ulnar bursa and traveling through the carpal tunnel on the way to the distal phalanges of digits 2 through 5. And in addition to being able to flex every joint that Flexor Digitorum superficialis could flex, Profundus, and profundus means deep, can also flex the distal interphalangeal joints of digits 2 through 5. So that's a fantastic accomplishment, and that's handy dandy. In addition to this, we also have right here Flexor Pollicis longus. Flexor Pollicis longus is going to originate on the anterior radius. So remember, radius is here and ulna is there, and as well as the interosseous membrane between the two. And it will go down to the distal phalanx of digit 1, which is the thumb. So it can, in addition to flexing all of those joints that precede it, flex the interphalangeal joint of 1. And while we're here, I suppose it would be a delightful opportunity to talk about some of the other things that we can see. So here we can see the radial nerve, as well as the radial artery. The radial nerve is going to be a much bigger deal in the posterior aspect of the forearm, but there is this superficial branch of the radial nerve that we can see there. And we can see both the ulnar artery as well as the ulnar nerve on the ulnar side of the forearm as well. Thank you very much.